Hey y'all, Dixie here. Now that the fall is upon us and we are getting into the cooler months of the year, I want to talk about sleeping warm while backpacking. Tip number one is eat a snack right before you go to bed. Your body needs calories to keep itself warm, and of course you're gonna eat some sort of dinner, but a lot of people eat as soon as they get to camp and then they're up for a couple of hours before they decide to turn in and go to sleep. So eating something fatty like nuts right before you lie down at night, because oils and fats tend to take a while to digest, that's something that your body can use all night to help keep you warm. Also, apparently cinnamon, which I learned today, has some thermogenic properties that can help produce some heat while you sleep at night if you eat it right before bed. So adding it to something like oats, which take a while to break down because they've got a lot of bran and fiber, or basically anything like that that takes a while for your body to digest, is a good idea for a snack before you lie down. Now, on the opposite end of that, there are foods that can actually cause you to be colder at night. Something like spicy foods, jalapenos and cayennes. And you might think, well, that doesn't seem right. It seems like because they're spicy and because they feel hot to the tongue, and sometimes even when they're going down, it seems like it would warm you up. But apparently there is a nerve receptor on your tongue that tells your brain, hey, it's getting pretty hot in here, I think we need to cool down. And then your brain goes, okay, body, produce sweat so that we can cool down. And the last thing that you want to do when you're trying to stay warm while sleeping is to sweat, because then your clothing's going to be damp and it's going to actually cool you off, which is what sweat is designed to do to our bodies. So eating things that take a while to break down, good. Eating something that's going to make you sweat, not good. Tip number two is the Nalgene Heater trick. I feel like this has been shared pretty widely in the backpacking community, but it's actually not something that I have tried yet. But from what I hear, if you boil water right before you go to bed and pour it in something sturdy that can handle boiling water, like a Nalgene bottle, you don't want to do this in a regular old smart water bottle because it's going to melt and be a mess. But then you have that boiling water in your Nalgene. You want to screw the top on super tight. Then you slide your Nalgene or whatever bottle into a sock so you don't have that direct heat on your skin, but you're still getting some of the warmth, and then put it in the bottom of your sleeping bag. From what I have read and heard, this will actually stay warm for several hours. Some people say that they make it through the night. I've never liked the idea of carrying a heavier water bottle when I could just carry something lightweight like the smart water bottle, but maybe in the colder months when I am miserable at night, it's worth those few extra ounces during the day while I'm backpacking. Tip number three, avoid hot drinks before bed. I was actually going to make the suggestion for this tip to be drink hot drinks before bed, but upon doing a little bit of research, drinking something hot right before bed can actually have the opposite effect because of what I was talking about earlier with the spicy foods and that receptor on your tongue that can tell your body, hey, it's really hot, we need to cool down. And the last thing that you want to do is drink a warm drink to try to warm up, and then it makes you even colder from sweating. But I have kind of always done this in the colder weather, have a hot tea or something like that before bed, especially because I liked holding the cup that was hot on my hands that were freezing. But this is something that I'm definitely gonna have to rethink. Now, if you're drinking a drink like hot chocolate that's gonna add more calories, you could offset the cooling down that you're going to be doing from that receptor on your tongue going, hey, it's too hot. But I just don't like the idea of making myself sweat right before I get in my sleeping bag. Anyway, if you want to learn more about this, I will link to an article in the video description. But just know that hot drinks before bed, if you're intending to warm yourself up, might actually do the opposite. Tip number four is change out of your hiking clothes as soon as you get to camp. Even though I typically get to camp as the sun is starting to set, or sometimes already has, and it is cooler, I'm usually still pretty warm because I've been rushing to get there, or, I've been active. But it doesn't take long after getting to camp for me to start cooling off pretty quickly because the temperature has dropped from the heat of the day. So my recommendation is, as quickly as you can, like maybe set up your tent and then immediately change, get out of those damp hiking clothes, because it seems like once you get that first chill, it's hard to kind of warm up from there. But getting those damp clothes off of you that are going to cause you to cool down and putting on something warm and dry should help keep your body temperature more comfortable. And also, you definitely don't want to sleep in the clothes that you hike in, at least in the cooler months. And I really don't think ever. It's a great idea to allow things to dry out, especially the swampy areas and your feet. So getting out of that damp stuff and allowing your body to be dry for several hours is always a positive while backpacking, especially in the colder months, as sweaty clothes can cause you to be really cold all night. Tip number 5, use properly rated gear. This is specifically for your sleeping bag or quilt and sleeping pad. For your sleeping bag or quilt, I recommend, if you're a cold sleeper, having a rating of 10 degrees colder than what you're actually going to experience while you're backpacking. And that's if it's a comfort rating on the sleeping bag or quilt. I've talked about this in videos before, that you have to pay attention to what degree rating your bag is, like what that actually means. Does that mean you're going to be comfortable at that temperature, or does that mean you're going to survive at that temperature? So if you find out that it's a survival rating that your bag is rated for, then I'd even go down 20 degrees from what you're actually going to experience. But that's just my advice coming from somebody who freezes at night. For a sleeping pad, it is recommended in 3-season weather that you have an R value of 2, and that R value is just the sleeping pad's ability to keep you insulated from the ground. The higher the R value, the warmer the sleeping pad will be. So in these nights where it's starting to cool off from the 50s to the 40s, you can probably still get by with an R value of 2. But as you continue heading to those colder temperatures approaching freezing, then having something like a 3 or a 4 makes sense. And then when you're at consistently freezing temperatures at night, or even worse, below freezing, then you want to have more than a 4 on an R value for a sleeping pad. These are obviously my recommendations as somebody who sleeps cold at night, but you'll have to fine tune what works for you, and you will figure it out over time. Tip number 6 is use down booties, or maybe even some sort of battery operated socks. There's nothing more miserable when you're trying to go to sleep at night, I think, than having freezing cold feet and you kind of feel stuck, like there's nothing you can do to warm them up. Having something like down booties helps trap the heat that your feet are producing right there at your feet, and it will help keep them warm on top of having them inside of your foot box area of your quilt or your sleeping bag. Studies have even shown that keeping your feet warm can help you sleep better. I had some down booties that I was really enjoying, but I had to give them up because I've got a down allergy. I have not yet looked into a synthetic option. I'm sure they exist, although they're going to be heavier, bulkier, and probably not quite as warm. But another option, if you also are allergic to down, or the down booties aren't enough for you, they do make some battery operated booties or socks. I've used something similar on my hands. On Mount Kilimanjaro, I had some battery heated gloves. They didn't last on high as long as I would have liked them to. Of course, it was really, really cold up there, and I wanted them to last the entire summit. But I think nestled in my sleeping bag at night with some battery operated socks or booties, just having a little bit of time with that warmth would be better than none at all, especially, just to get you heated up and going so that you can fall asleep. I would look for something that you could just recharge using a battery bank instead of having to carry extra batteries. But those things do exist if it's something you're interested in. Tip number 7 is hand warmers. Like I mentioned before, I don't typically carry a Nalgene, so I've brought along hand warmers to throw down in the bottom of my quilt, or even to put in my pockets so I can put my hands in the pocket of my puffy coat. But they actually make toe warmers and body warmers that have adhesive on it, so you can just peel off the sticker and stick them to wherever you want to. I would not put them directly on your skin. That is definitely not recommended. But sticking it to your sock or your shirt on the inside of your coat, something like that, helps keep you warm at night. And they do tend to last 8 to 12 hours or so. The only downside is they're not super lightweight. If you bring a bunch of them, they're only one-time use, so they never get lighter after you use them. So this has me thinking maybe I should look at how much those weigh versus a Nalgene, and then see how the Nalgene works versus the hand warmers, because maybe that's my answer. Tip number 8 is bring a Mylar emergency blanket. I recommend having these regardless of what temperature it is outside, because you can literally become hypothermic at any time. So having something that you can wrap up in to warm your body is a good idea. Also, it could help a helicopter find you if you have to push the SOS button, or if you go missing and they're trying to hunt you. But also it can add a little bit of warmth to your sleep setup if you just need a little bit extra one night. You can put it between your sleeping bag and your sleeping pad, so it helps reflect some of that heat up. Having that option to kind of kick up your heat a little bit is nice if you need it. Tip number 9 is opt for a hooded puffy coat. If you're like me and you're cold at night more often than not, and you like to sleep with your puffy coat on, having your head poking out of your sleeping bag is gonna release some heat and cause that area to be cold. So if you have a hooded puffy coat, it tends to offer a little bit more warmth because it also insulates your neck and your head kind of all together, instead of having a separate coat and then wearing some kind of beanie at night. If you don't like wearing a puffy coat to bed, another option is getting a sleeping bag that comes with a hood built in, or you can purchase one separately. Tip number 10, be choosy with your campsite. You don't want to camp too high or too low. I know the typical mindset is, well, the higher I go in elevation, the colder it gets. Yes, that is true, but cold air tends to settle in the bottom of a valley too. So really finding somewhere in that sweet spot of not to the tippy top where it's going to be so much colder, but also not on the center of the valley floor. I like to camp where I know that I'm going to get the early morning sun to try to help me get out of my warm cocoon in the morning because I'm really bad at being an early riser, especially when I'm cold. So knowing that sun will hit my tent in the morning helps me kind of get going. On the flip side of that, if you're in too much of an open area and the wind starts whipping in the middle of the night, you could be colder from having the wind breeze through your tent all night. So having some sort of windbreak, like a bush nearby in case the wind does pick up, is a good idea. And finally, don't camp too close to water. While it is convenient for being able to drink as much as you want to at camp, the air near a water source is going to have more moisture, and therefore things will feel damp and you'll be colder. Tip number 11 is take a friend, pet, or a significant other. Having another body in your microclimate of your shelter is actually going to make a difference as far as raising the temperature. But I'm going to put some fine print right here. If you take a dog, don't take one just to help warm you up and then not properly care for it. You want to make sure that you know what you're doing if you're taking a pet out in the colder months. And I've got videos on that if you want to learn more about how to properly care for an animal while you're backpacking. But you can't just throw them in your tent and be like, oh, they're fine, they're a dog. Tip number 12 is pile up the leaves. This is something that I really never thought of until I read the book about Grandma Gatewood, where she would bed up on leaves and it helped insulate her from the ground. And then when I went out to do my little Grandma Gatewood experience, I did the same thing and found out that leaves really do help insulate you from the ground. So kind of creating a pile of leaves and then setting your tent up on it makes sense, that it would then help insulate you from the ground still through your tent and your sleeping pad, but also kind of piling up the leaves around your tent. Finally, tip number 13 is heat up some rocks. Now this one is only really if you find yourself in an emergency situation and you need some warmth, but this was something that I read that Grandma Gatewood had done during her thru hike of the Appalachian Trail. She put some rocks in or near the fire and then basically cuddled with them or dug them down and put leaves on top of them and laid on them. If you want to do something like this in your tent, I guess you could, but you'd want to have something to wrap the rock up in to protect it from melting your gear or burning your skin. So again, this one's only kind of if you find yourself in an emergency and you need something to hold on to while you sleep. It's an idea. Do be careful with your rock selection if you decide to do this. Putting a rock in the fire can cause it to explode, especially if it's porous and has water down in it, so be careful for that. It's safer to go with rocks that are not porous, but I assume if they got hot enough they could still explode. So maybe closer to the fire rather than right in it. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today. If you've got any tips for staying warm while you're sleeping at night on a backpacking trip that I did not mention, please leave those in the comments below, because I'm always learning and trying to stay warm at night. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we will see y'all next time.